lewd in the mail. And lewd could be anything from pornography to anatomy textbooks.
Oh.
Yeah. So he was pretty crazy
Rigid,
on his own.
Sure.
Harry began to believe that Stanford White had taken out a hit on him and that he was being stalked by a dangerous gang of
Which he wasn't.
hitmen. No, yeah. So he bought a gun because someone like him needs a firearm.
Yep.
In June of 1906, Harry and Evelyn decided to take a European holiday. So they stopped in New York for a couple days before boarding the ocean liner.
Mm-hmm.
Fall wanted to take in a show while in town, so he purchased tickets for himself, Evelyn, and two of his friends to attend a performance of Mamselle Champagne, because that is the next Shakespearean epic right there. The performance was held on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden.
Oh.
So that was kind of like a dinner theater, because you could
neat.
go there and eat and drink and then watch this show.
Yeah.
Regardless of the caliber of the performance. But Harry and Evelyn, along with his two friends, McCaleb and Beale, went to the Cafe Martin before attending the show. Now, the Cafe Martin was located in the former Delmonico's restaurant space adjacent to Madison Square Garden. It was a French restaurant that was popular with with upper-class patrons who were considered the beau monde, which is a French term for popular society who may or may not include true elites. Now, if you look up the restaurant, there is a website that has copies of the original menus from that time period.
Oh, cool.
They actually had the Christmas 1906 menu on there. And what shocked me, of course, is that a multi-course dinner only cost $1.50.
Yeah.
And, of course, that would have been a couple days' wages back then. Mm-hmm. Anywho, while they were dining there, Evelyn saw Stanford White enter the room and head out to the restaurant's balcony. Now, she did something rather strange in that she asked for a piece of paper and a pencil. Once she obtained these items, she wrote down a note to Harry that said, quote, "The B was just here but has left." The B stood for beast, which was how Evelyn and Harry referred to Stanford. Harry and Evelyn went on to the show, and of course Harry was acting odd from the start. It was an excruciatingly hot day, and yet he wore an overcoat over his tuxedo and then refused to take it off, even though they were in an outdoor venue. Around 11 p.m., Stanford White...
Could he have been hiding something?
Yeah. Around 11 p.m., Stanford White arrived at the performance. Now, he always had a table reserved for him since he, partially funded the construction of this building and had an apartment there and everything. Harry immediately saw him enter the room because he had been kind of agitated all night. He'd been going from table to table, talking to people, and at one point he even sat down with Stanford White's brother-in-law and chatted with him. Mm-hmm. Now, Evelyn had apparently seen Stanford as well, and she just told Harry that they should leave, so she got up and headed for the elevator, but Harry approached White's table, withdrew a gun, and shot Stanford 3 times at point-blank range. Mm-hmm. He died instantly.
Oh.
And according to reports, his face was pretty brutalized by the gunshots. People said he was...
So he just whipped out a gun and shot him right in front... It's a whole crowd of people...
in front of him. There was nearly 1,000 people there that night. He then reportedly shouted over the aghast crowd, quote, "I did it because he ruined my wife. He had it coming to him. He took advantage of the girl and then abandoned her," which is not entirely true.
Right.
People literally thought that this was part of the show.
Oh.
And the chorus girls...
Audience participation.
Right, yeah. The chorus girls on stage got a bird's eye view of this, and of course they started freaking out.
Sure.
So word started spreading that something bad had gone down. Meanwhile, Harry just walks back through the crowd and meets Evelyn at the elevator, where he apparently told her, quote, "It's all right. I probably saved your life."
I killed the beast.
Right. We're in a fairy tale of his own making. Harry was arrested soon after and charged with first-degree murder. He was incarcerated at the Tombs prison, which sounds pretty scary.
It does sound scary.
But in fact, Harry was treated very well. He was allowed to have his own custom-tailored clothes and even had his meals catered by Delmonico's.
No.
Yes.
In the prison.
Right. They actually have a picture of him in the newspaper, him sitting at a table with his, all set out with all this china and glassware and fancy food.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's definitely good to have money when you're in prison.
Mm-hmm.
The press had a field day with all this, and the ensuing trial quickly became known as the trial of the century. So early, though it was.
Okay.
1906. Plenty of years left in the century. So the original strategy was that the district attorney wanted to do was that they should just have Harry declared insane and pack him off to an asylum. Because it would save, the state money and prosecuting him. And I mean, it's a pretty cut and dry case when you murder someone instead of in front of several thousand.
Well, that's not really insanity, though, because it was premeditated.
Well,
he's not insane.
I mean, this was more of a
kind of he's nuts, but not that way.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really, really kind of bizarre, some of the stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. Harry's lawyer actually wanted to go along with this plan because it would save Harry from the electric chair.
Because otherwise it would be death penalty.
Right. But Harry dismissed his attorney and hired a new one because he wanted to go to trial. In fact, he was looking forward to exposing all the perverts that ran the city. This is his chance. Pretty early on, newspapers were running articles claiming that Harry was perfectly sane and that Stanford White was a pretty despicable person. So this is an excerpt from the Reading Times of Reading, Pennsylvania.
PA. Yeah.
And it was entitled, "Thaw is Declared Sane by Alienist."
That's a show.
Yep. I have not seen it yet. I need to get with it. And then under one of the article, like little... Back then, they had like multiple articles and headings, you know.
Yeah.
One of the articles is entitled "Orgies in the Tower."
Oh.
Stanford White's studio in the tower of Madison Square Garden was at once an expression of his skill and taste as an artist and of the darker side of his nature. Here it was high over the old trees of the square that he maintained a rendezvous and a retreat. The place was elaborately furnished, its keynote the luxury that pleases and invites, and it was thoroughly artistic as well, for White was an artist first of all. He gave his fancy fullest sway here, and it was a rich fancy. Rare old paintings marked these midnight playgrounds. There were beautiful paintings, dainty tabourets, classic tapestries, divans of the East, everything to charm and please the senses.
Yeah.
And it was here that White allowed himself full play. The man of affairs shed his garb of reserve, and the studio was the scene of many an all-night revel. It seems to have been his favorite entertainment place for those thoughtless butterflies who fell within the sweep of his net. Here it was that time after time he gathered his convivial companions about him. Then the lights of Broadway paled. Tales of many a wild night have floated down from the aerial home whose windows look down on the scene of the tragedy. The studio and its appointments is indicative of White, the artist. The uses to which the studio was so often put indicate only the love of pleasure which overshadowed for the time his qualities as a creator of monuments which will live to do him credit.
Sounds like a tawdry melodrama.
I know, right?
I like this whole article.
Stanford White was an inveterate first nighter at the theaters, and his bent ran toward
like
the
opening
nights,
yeah.
And his bent ran toward the lighter form of amusement, whose showgirls and chorus maidens disported themselves in attenuated gowns. He was a privileged character around the homes of comic opera and musical comedies, having entree behind the scenes in many playhouses. His eyes for the beautiful he retained always, and he displayed an uncommon interest in young, pretty girls of the chorus. It was always Stanford White, good fellow, about the show shops, and he was generous in his entertainment of newcomers to the ranks, especially if they were trim of figure and good to look upon. Then it says, pursued young girls. His position as an officer of the Garden Company made the arrangement of these revels an easy matter. White, who was keenly on the outlook for pretty girls, had once gone so far as to arrange with a certain unscrupulous photographer to send him proofs of all the prettiest of his subjects. If White was pleased, he would make every effort to win the acquaintance of these girls. When he felt like utilizing the garden rooms, he'd get together a merry party, and the conventionalities were chased out of the window. Employees about the building had no right to restrain White if he cared to take a party of girls to the den. Age made but little difference to White. In fact, nothing seemed to please him better than to win the smiles of the girls still in their teens. If the police told all they knew about the escapades in White's apartments, a sensation higher than his tragic death would result. But yeah, I mean, it goes on for a while talking about girls stole from homes. The girls of the party, they were not old enough to be yet called young women, had stolen away from their homes in quiet districts. I think they're kind of talking about one of White's, basically Stanford White and his men friends gave dinner and entertainments in this superbly furnished suite of rooms, which were talked of in whispers.
Is this all in No, this is the other apartment on 24th.
Now this is a place under surveillance. Everyone in the Broadway world knew of White's place in the Madison Square Garden Tower, but few knew of still another retreat not far away.
Oh, okay.
Captain Hodgins of the West 13th Street Station said last night that a building in West 28th Street near 5th Avenue had been under surveillance for months past because of reports received of the curious and fantastic happenings that occurred on the top floor. This floor is leased by a man who bears a striking resemblance to a dilettante in the arts, who is all well known in exclusive society of Paris and London as he is to the 400 of New York and Newport. Mm-hmm. So they're apparently referencing someone that we don't know, but that's very, but they clearly knew of. So yeah, he clearly, they basically are laying it all bare there in that article. Mm-hmm. So it became clear that insanity was pretty much the only way to save Harry from the death penalty. So Harry's defense eventually claimed that he experienced a, quote, brainstorm, or basically temporary insanity, and killed Stanford in a fit of rage and jealousy. So next time I get really angry, I'm having a brainstorm.
Yeah.
So the trial opened on February 4th, 1907. The lead prosecutor was out for blood. He even told the press that if Evelyn testified to her husband being a hero, that he would, quote, tear her limb to limb and exhibit the interesting remains triumphantly.
Oh my.
Yeah, I was like, damn, that sounds like a threat to me.
It does sound like a threat.
Of course, the Thaw family had their psychiatrist testify to Harry's insane delusion the night of the murder. They also found a doorman who testified that when Harry and Evelyn began seeing each other in 1903, Stanford White had threatened to kill Harry for trifling with his woman. Despite these wins for the defense, Harry's attorney soon stepped down because he was not smart enough to tackle the prosecution. A lawyer from San Francisco by the name of Delphin Delmaz, who was famous for never losing a case, was brought in. It was him that convinced Evelyn to reveal the extent of her relationship with Stanford on the stand. Over the course of 2 hours, she related the events of the night at Madison Square Garden. She also told of the night that she revealed her involvement with Stanford to Harry. She practically collapsed on the stand halfway through the story and had to be revived by a doctor. She then described her first sexual encounter with Stanford. Quote, when I came to myself, I was greatly frightened and started to scream. Mr. White came and tried to quiet me. As I sat up, I saw mirrors all over. I began to scream again, and Mr. White asked me to keep quiet, saying that it was all over. When he threw the kimono over me, he left the room. I screamed harder than ever. I don't remember much anything after that. He took me home, and I sat up all night crying. She also claimed that, quote, he made me swear that I would never tell my mother about it. He said that it was all right. That there was nothing, quote, so nice as young girls and nothing so loathsome as fat ones. You must never get fat. What a bastard.
Oh my God.
He wasn't bad enough. So Evelyn's testimony continued to the next day as she then described Harry's obsession with Stanford. Mm-hmm. Apparently, Stanford had intervened when Evelyn returned from Europe with Thaw, telling her that she needed to stay away from him and that he was a morphine addict. He arranged for her to see a lawyer who was basically going to legalize the fact that Harry had kidnapped Evelyn and taken her to Europe, even though she went willingly, I think, at first. Mm-hmm. Not so
but
much
not
when he locked her in a castle.
Right.
She eventually confessed to Harry that this is what was going on, and he convinced her to go back to the lawyer and demand that the papers were burned. It sounded kind of like it was an early restraining order that they were trying to put together. Mm-hmm. She also detailed some of the intimate details of Stanford's rather interesting sex life. Mm-mm. She talked about a party that he had given where he had arranged for a girl in a rather see-through dress to be put in a pie with birds and then presented to his guests.
No.
Yes.
So is this the first woman that jumps out of a cake?
Right. Except it was a pie with birds.
Wow.
Evelyn recalled that she confronted Stanford about, quote, ruining that girl, meaning that he'd slept with her, and that Stanford had laughed as if it were no matter. Of course, the prosecution tore Evelyn to bits. The prosecutor asked her about her nude modeling, which was very true. Mm-hmm. There is a nude portrait of her by James Beckwith Carroll, who was a very reputable artist, but she still appeared nude in it.
But that was something that models did. I mean, that wasn't a questionable thing even then, right? Well, or I guess if the Diana statue was a big deal, then
I mean,
I don't know.
You were a certain kind of woman if you were modeling naked. I mean, it's kind of the same way
Even though there were tons of paintings from the last few hundred years before then that featured naked women.
Well, I mean, they really started clamping down on that in the 19th century. You get that sense of Victorianism.
Puritans.
Yeah.
Ugh, America.
Yes. He also brought up her affair with Stanford, asking her if she knew that it was wrong since he had been a married man. Evelyn said she knew it was, quote,